Hello, and welcome back to the pricing channel for small businesses. We're starting this video with a view from beautiful downtown Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, where on a typical summer Saturday afternoon, the sidewalks are just jam-packed with residents, visitors, and tourists who are all here to check out the restaurants, coffee shops, bakeries, brew pubs, gift shops, souvenir shops, clothing shops, and more small businesses. In our last video, we mentioned that there are some economic clouds gathering on the horizon, which could create conditions such that the skill set for successfully increasing prices that we discussed in the last video could determine which of those businesses in downtown Coeur d'Alene survive for the next year and which businesses don't. So let's get at it and take a look at that story. So today there will not be any presentations, but just some discussion about what the future might look like for us small business owners. In our last two videos, we used over 30 minutes of video time to talk about price changes and specifically price increases. The reason why we did this is because the price increase skill set could be the one that determines if our businesses do survive for the next 5 years. And so let's take a look at some things happening in the economy and what our economic forecast might be as a result of these things. And of course, everyone knows fuel prices are increasing from less than $2 a gallon for gasoline last year to somewhere around $3 a gallon now, and even more in some areas. And look at diesel fuel prices. You might say, I don't care about that because I don't use diesel fuel. But diesel fuel prices drive transportation and shipping costs. And so if you haven't already, you're going to see price increases for transportation and shipping that you may use in your business. Many housing markets are super hot. In fact, this house has increased in value by over 20% in just 1 year. And speaking of housing, look at this 4x8 piece of plywood at Home Depot in Canada. Last year, it was $37.50. So what's driving all these price increases? Well, for example, the price of oil has doubled in the last year and it's still rising. And interest rates continue to fall. A 15-year mortgage is currently under 2.3%. And that is almost free money and part of the problem that's driving the increase in house prices. Overall, it seems like there's too much money chasing too few goods. So where is all that money coming from? Here's a chart of national debt increases under various presidential administrations. Jimmy Carter raised the debt by less than $1 trillion. Ronald Reagan, George Bush, and Bill Clinton raised it something over $1 trillion in their administrations. And then George W. Bush, over his 8 years, raised our debt by $6 trillion. And then Barack Obama, over his 8 years, raised the debt an additional $8 trillion. Finally, Donald Trump, in his 4 years, raised the debt $6.8 trillion, and much of that was in the last year of his administration during the COVID pandemic. And Joe Biden, who's been in office for about 3 months now, has raised the debt by $2 trillion to continue to provide COVID pandemic relief. So what this means is, in the last year alone, something like $4 to $5 trillion have been pumped into the economy to counter the COVID virus shutdown of 2020 and 2021. So given all this, what could be the effect on the economy? Well, it's something we haven't had to talk about for a long, long time. And it's the big word, inflation. And so, what is inflation? Well, this slide gives a good definition of it. Inflation is a general rise in the price level in an economy over a period of time. When the general price level rises, each unit of currency buys fewer and fewer goods and services. Well, to go along with that, we can ask, what causes inflation? Well, this slide shows two primary causes. The first is demand pull inflation. And this is where consumer demand for goods and services increases so much that it outstrips the supply. And that's basically what we're seeing in the housing market in many areas. To go along with this is something called the overexpansion of money supply. And this is where we have too much money chasing too few goods, which also causes the demand pull inflation. So what happens when sustained inflation takes hold in an economy? In this slide, we can see that as oil prices increase, it has an effect on many sectors in the economy, from transportation and shipping to clothing, consumer products, building products, also basic chemicals which drive the prices of pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, paint, building products, and more. These oil price increases also drive increases in the agricultural sector, where oil is basically used as fuel as well as a feedstock for agricultural chemicals. And so these agricultural price increases further drive increases in all those end markets that we just talked about. All of this adds up to a loss of purchasing power. And at some point, people begin panic buying. Panic buying is where people don't necessarily buy for what they need right now, but to buy in advance of future price increases. Another thing that can happen during sustained inflation is interest rate increases, as the government tries to shrink the money supply and to reduce consumption by increasing the cost of money, interest being the cost of money. Under these conditions, unemployment will increase, and we'll also see decreases in house construction and in auto and truck sales, which will further drive unemployment. Governments have also been known to increase taxes during inflationary times to try and counter deficit spending, because all the things government buys are also going up in price during inflationary times. So how bad can inflation get in America? Well, the current inflation rate is running at about 1.4% overall. And some economists forecast that it might increase to about 4% by the end of 2021. Will that be good, or will it be bad for small businesses? Well, this chart shows the historical inflation rate in the U.S. And as we can see, back in the 1960s, it was running at about 2% per year, and then started to increase and peaked at about 14% around 1980. From there, it began to decrease, and as we reached the 2000s, it returned to a rate of about 2% or so until it reached the current 1.4%. This chart shows the historical prime rate. The prime rate is the interest rate banks charge to the very best borrowers. And as we can see, it tends to track the historical inflation rate. And in 1980, when inflation peaked at 14%, the prime rate peaked at about 20%. And then as inflation came down over the years, so did the prime rate. The current prime rate is running at 3.25%. And so let's talk about the direct effects of inflation for small businesses and what we need to watch for. So as a small business owner, first of all, I would suggest keeping track of inflation news, and particularly something called the Consumer Price Index, which you'll hear in the news, because this will give you signals about what might be coming up ahead. And also, we want to keep careful watch on price increases from our suppliers. As small business owners, we should also monitor news about the prime interest rate and listen carefully for any increases, even if inflation seems to be steady. We should also watch out for announcements from the government about increases in something called the federal discount rate, because this is the interest rate that the Federal Reserve charges banks that borrow money from the Federal Reserve so that they can make loans to you. And so as the federal discount rate increases, watch out for your loan interest rates to increase also. And stay aware of mortgage rate increases, because as those rates increase, housing demand might fall, which could be a direct impact on your business. And obviously, if your suppliers are raising your prices, you have to pass those price increases on to your customers in order to maintain your business profitability. Another thing we should do as business owners is take a look at our level of debt and the kind of debt that we have. Because debt service during inflationary times can kill a business if we don't maintain our profitability through price increases. And you'll see increasing bankruptcies in the news as a result of that. The type of debt we have is important. If our debt has variable interest rates, such as lines of credit, those interest rates are going to go up as the prime rate increases. And so you might remember from the slide we saw prime rates as high as 20%. That could mean your line of credit interest rate could go up to as high as 22 or 23%. Also, look at developing secondary sources of supply, especially for key raw materials, because during inflationary times, one of your key suppliers might go bankrupt and leave you high and dry. And speaking of supplies, we also want to try and minimize the level of our inventories. This includes raw materials, work in process, as well as finished goods that are ready for sale. Because inventory at all these levels ties up free cash that we might need for other purposes. Another reason to minimize inventories is so we don't get caught with excess inventory if demand decreases. During inflationary times with rising unemployment, people will have less money to spend for our goods and services. And so excess inventories is just our free cash tied up that we can't use for something else. If you sell on terms, such as net 30 days, net 60 days, you'll want to carefully monitor your customers who are not paying on time or who are not paying at all. And in some cases, you may want to put them on cash in advance before you sell them something. The reason for this is if customers are not paying on time or if they're not paying at all, they may be prime candidates to go bankrupt themselves. And if that happens, you're likely not to get anything from them that they owe you. In fact, back in the 1990s, when I was managing a company, I had a customer who owed us $60,000. They placed another order. Our finance people blocked that order until they paid. And that customer called me and begged and pleaded with me to ship them another order. They were going to get money that day to send to us. Well, against my own best instincts, I released that order. That was on a Friday. On Monday, I got news that that customer had declared bankruptcy. Now, we were able to get the shipment back because it had not been delivered to them. But the $60,000 that they owed us, well, that came out of my performance bonus for that year. And so I remember that incident very, very well. Now, is inflation going to go as high as it did 40 years ago? I don't know, and I sure hope not. I just want you to be prepared if it does. And we'll be here with our video series to talk about those events if they happen and how to manage around them. Now, since this is our 8th video, we're going to start doing something new. If you have any questions or comments about anything we've covered, please put those in the comments section below, particularly questions. Because if you have a question about something, chances are other people have that same question also, and we'd like to cover those questions in future videos. So please, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss a single video, and I look forward to seeing you again.